Welcome to this explainer. Okay, today we're unpacking something that is frankly absolutely extraordinary. We're digging into a groundbreaking 2022 clinical trial that shows us how we might not just hit the brakes on biological aging, but actually throw it into reverse. And look, I know that sounds like pure science fiction, but it's not. It is grounded in rigorous peer-reviewed clinical data, and we are going to walk through the exact evidence that proves it.
So, let's just dive right into the big question here. It almost sounds too simple, doesn't it? Like, can we really just filter our blood and reset our biological age? Or is this just some temporary parlor trick that makes the lab numbers look good for a couple of days? Well, we're going to look at the hard data behind this procedure, which is called Therapeutic Plasma Exchange, or TPE, to see if it actually resets our cellular clock from the inside out.
Our roadmap for today is super focused. We're going to start with the physical mechanics of the intervention itself, then dive into the trial protocol, explore how it actually repairs cellular damage and dismantles inflamed aging. Finally, we'll settle a major clinical debate about remodeling versus dilution and end with what this means for the real world.
All right, let's kick things off by looking closely at the actual TPE intervention.
Think of therapeutic plasma exchange as a highly sophisticated systemic filter. It's essentially this brilliant mechanism designed to clear out the accumulated biological noise from our bloodstream. As we age, our plasma just fills up with all these pro-inflammatory signals and cellular debris. TPE acts as a massive physical sweep to just clear out that incredibly congested biological highway.
But here's the catch. You can't just take the old plasma out, you have to replace it. So the intervention physically removes that aged, inflamed fluid and swaps it with 5% albumin alongside IVIG, which are intravenous antibodies absolutely crucial for preventing infection. And the clinical outcome? We see this rapid drop in biological age. It actively reduces cellular senescence and kicks off a huge immune remodeling process. It's literally like swapping out a heavily polluted environment for a completely pristine one.
So how did they actually prove this works? Let's look at the trial design.
This study was ingeniously set up to bridge a massive generational gap. They mapped an older cohort, we're talking patients aged 65 to 75, directly against a young baseline of 20 to 29-year-olds. Now, the ultimate goal for the older group wasn't just, managing the symptoms of aging. The goal was to force a real, quantifiable shift, literally dragging the older patients' biological profiles back to mirror that healthy, young 20-something baseline.
And to do that, they had to be pretty aggressive. The protocol was intense. Over just one single month, these patients underwent twice-weekly procedures, hitting about 8 to 10 sessions in total. And the researchers collected samples across 5 distinct testing rounds, going from baseline all the way to round 5. This gives us this incredibly high-resolution data on exactly how fast the human body can reset when you just continuously flush out the bad signals.
Now let's get into the really exciting part. What is actually happening to the cellular damage?
To figure out if the cells were genuinely healing themselves, the researchers zeroed in on PBMCs, peripheral blood mononuclear cells. These are super important immune cells. By looking deep inside these specific cells, they could measure whether the therapy was actively fixing systemic intracellular damage or, if it was just kind of washing the extracellular fluids around them.
And the results here are, well, they're kind of stunning. As the testing rounds progressed, markers for deep DNA damage, specifically this marker called 8-OHDG, showed this profound, steady decline. And right alongside it, P16, which is a major red flag protein for cellular senescence, it just plummeted. This is huge because it proves TPE is altering the fundamental health of the cells themselves. They aren't just floating in cleaner fluid, they are genuinely actually repairing their own DNA.
We also see this beautiful, favorable shift in the overall immune composition. As we get older, our immune system gets totally exhausted. Myeloid cells start to dominate, and our adaptive defense network just shrinks. But by rounds 4 and 5, TPE triggered a massive restructuring. It completely reversed that age-related exhaustion by giving a huge boost of vital T cells, B cells, and natural killer cells. It quite literally restored the immune profile of a much younger person.
Beyond just the individual cells, though, we really need to talk about dismantling inflammation across the whole system. So the trial tracked 72 specific proteins that were sky-high in the older cohort compared to the young folks. Look at how this maps out. At baseline, it is just lit up with high expression.
But watch this. By round 2, it already starts to cool down and normalize. And by rounds 4 and 5, boom! There is a near total clearance of these age-elevated proteins. That old-age biological profile is essentially erased, returning almost perfectly back to the young baseline. And here is the absolutely crucial takeaway that the clinical experts flagged. The vast majority of these suppressed proteins aren't just random bystanders. They act as core drivers for chronic systemic inflammation. So, the central hub being dismantled here is the body's inflammatory response pathway, which is the very engine driving the aging process in the first place. When we synthesize all these pathways together, it becomes super clear what TPE is breaking down. It effectively dismantles the entire network of inflammation. We're talking about uncoupling dangerous toll-like receptor bindings, like TLR4, and shutting down aggressive pro-inflammatory signaling. It's basically like walking into a house where the fire alarm has been blaring for a decade and finally just unplugging the system.
What makes this particular data so mind-blowing is that this proteomic sweep didn't just target vague, generalized aging. It aggressively suppressed very specific pathological markers. We're seeing dramatic downregulation of cancer-associated proteins, and incredibly, a marker called TDP43, which is heavily linked to severe neural decay and neurodegeneration. And the best part? It maintained this drop for weeks after the initial intervention.
Which brings us to a massive debate in the medical community. Is this real remodeling or just mechanical dilution?
For a long time, skeptics were totally convinced by the dilution effect. You know, the idea that TPE merely waters down bad blood, kind of like pouring clean water into a muddy bucket. If that were true, your fluids would just quickly resaturate with all those inflammatory markers the second the procedure stopped. But the proven reality here is systemic remodeling. Because we see a sustained drop in markers like TDP43 and real intracellular DNA repair happening days and weeks after the procedure, it proves the cells themselves have fundamentally changed their behavior. It's changing how the body operates, not just what's floating around inside it.
So knowing all this is real, what does the clinical future actually look like?
Well, the biggest hurdle with trials like this is cost. Extensive full-body omics testing can run up to $50,000 a patient, which is obviously a no-go for everyday preventative healthcare. To fix this, researchers have proposed a highly targeted, super affordable 4 to 6 marker tracking panel. By just keeping an eye on cellular damage markers like 8-OHDG, neurodegeneration baseline TDP43, and a couple of high-sensitivity cytokines, modern longevity clinics can quickly validate if these interventions are working for you in just 3 to 5 days.
To wrap all of this up into a quick executive summary, we are looking at a physical intervention that aggressively sweeps away biological noise. We have a proven, validated mechanism of deep systemic cellular repair that fixes DNA and unplugs inflammaging pathways. And most importantly, we have a realistic, cost-effective roadmap for tracking this in everyday clinical practice.
As we wrap up this explainer and look ahead to a future where age reversal isn't just a buzzword, but something we can actually measure and access, I want to leave you with a thought. How might tracking your own deep cellular health, knowing exactly what's going on inside your cells in real time, how might that permanently transform the way you approach your own aging? It's definitely something to chew on as we step into this wild new frontier of preventative medicine. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I'll see you next time.